expanse of the Roman Empire, once a beacon of unparalleled power and dominion, began a slow, inexorable decline from within. Its foundations, built upon disciplined legions and unwavering ambition, were slowly eroded by a series of critical, often fatal, military and strategic decisions made across centuries. Before we continue, please like and subscribe. This is not a story of sudden collapse, but rather a protracted unraveling, a slow decay witnessed through the lens of command and consequence. The very machinery of the empire, designed for expansion and control, eventually turned against itself, driven by errors of judgment at the highest levels. The initial phase of this decline is often traced to the immense pressures of expansion itself. Successful conquest of vast territories brought in staggering wealth and an overwhelming influx of diverse peoples. Managing this empire required constant, brutal military action, and the strategies employed to subdue these new lands sowed seeds of future instability. The focus shifted from securing borders to simply maintaining the machinery of conquest, leading to the overextension of military resources. The need for constant recruitment and the subsequent integration of disparate peoples placed an unsustainable strain on the imperial structure. As the empire stabilized, a different set of strategic errors began to manifest. The reliance on military force, while effective for expansion, became a liability when faced with complex geopolitical realities. Internal divisions, fueled by the growing gap between the wealthy elite and the struggling populace, were exacerbated by military priorities. Decisions regarding where to allocate legions, how to manage frontier defenses, and how to negotiate with external threats were often dictated more by immediate political expediency than by long-term strategic necessity. The transition from an expansive empire to a defensive entity marked a crucial turning point. Yet the methods used in this transition proved deeply flawed. Focus increasingly turned toward the frontiers, creating a permanent, costly military presence that drained the central treasury. Fortifications were built, walls were reinforced, and armies were stationed along vulnerable borders, a necessary defense, but one that also signaled a profound shift in imperial priorities. The nature of the military itself also underwent a transformation that contributed to the decline. Traditional virtues of Roman military discipline began to be overshadowed by the demands of constant warfare and the need for rapid, often brutal, results. The quality of the soldiers, the loyalty of the commanders, and the strategic foresight of the generals became increasingly compromised by ambition and self-interest. One of the most devastating strategic errors involved the management of barbarian incursions. Instead of adopting flexible, long-term strategies for assimilation or managed conflict, the empire often resorted to reactive, costly, and ultimately unsustainable measures. The policy of paying federates, while pragmatic in the short term, often created internal friction and weakened the cohesion of the imperial authority. The inability to effectively integrate these groups into a cohesive military and political entity meant that external threats were met with fragmented and often inadequate responses. The decisions made during the 3rd and 4th centuries were particularly pivotal. The internal political struggles and the constant drain of resources on the frontiers meant that the central government could no longer effectively project unified authority or allocate resources according to imperial needs. The reliance on increasingly powerful, yet often self-interested, military leaders meant that the loyalty of the armies often shifted from the abstract concept of the empire to the immediate interests of their generals. The strategic errors extended to the very structure of governance. The inability to adapt administrative structures to the changing realities of the empire meant that local problems were often ignored in favor of grand, centralized, but ultimately brittle military mandates. When crises arose, the response was often a desperate attempt to apply old imperial formulas to novel, complex situations, resulting in compounding failures. The final disintegration was not simply the result of external invasions, but the cumulative effect of these internal military and strategic miscalculations. The empire fractured because the decisions made in the name of preserving it were fundamentally misdirected. The focus on short-term military gains, the failure to cultivate internal political stability, and the unsustainable strain placed upon the legions created a cascade effect. The final outcome was the slow dissolution of a once mighty entity, a testament to how even the most formidable structures can be undone by a series of fatal, uncorrected errors in judgment. This internal corrosion reached its zenith as the very concept of unified imperial administration began to fray at the edges. The administrative apparatus, once a marvel of bureaucratic efficiency, became a cumbersome, reactive entity, bogged down by the sheer weight of necessary but poorly managed military demands. Provincial governors, isolated on the frontiers, found themselves increasingly prioritizing local defense and the extraction of immediate resources over the overarching strategic goals of the Senate and the Emperor in Rome. This decentralization, while perhaps offering a degree of localized flexibility, simultaneously eroded the centralized control that had once defined Roman strength. Tax revenues, once a predictable stream feeding the legions and the public works, became erratic, subject to local warlords and the shifting allegiances of provincial elites who sought to protect their own interests above imperial decree. The economic reality mirrored the military one. Resources were perpetually diverted to the defensive line, starving the interior of the investment needed for long-term infrastructure or social cohesion. The wealth generated by conquest, instead of fueling the empire's internal health, became a source of internal friction, fueling ambitious local leaders who viewed the central authority as an impediment to their own regional power. As the Western Empire faced the most acute pressures, the reliance on these increasingly autonomous regional powers became a fatal vulnerability. The very identity of Roman governance began to shift. It transitioned from a system built on law and civic duty to one dominated by the immediate, often ruthless, calculus of military necessity. Bonds of shared identity, which had held the disparate parts together for centuries, frayed under the strain of constant warfare and endemic internal distrust. The final collapse was therefore not merely a consequence of external barbarian pressure, but the agonizing result of a system that had fatally prioritized the maintenance of its own structure over the cultivation of the very stability it was meant to defend. The magnificent edifice crumbled not from a single blow, but from the cumulative weight of 1,000 imperfect choices made in the name of eternal dominion. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe for more.